That's Jimmy Stein. I'm Clint Lamb, and this is the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. Jimmy, lot continues to go on. It's the off season. It's one of the more dead periods as far as the transfer portal's closed, the season's over. Still haven't got to combine and pro days and all that stuff, NFL draft, spring practice, and then of course you start turning your attention. There will be another bit of a lull there between all of that and then the start of SEC media days, and that will be the second little stretch here, but there's still a ton to talk about. We're still going to be doing a ton of previewing leading up to spring practice. But in the meantime, I did want to discuss some of the more recent happenings, including Amari Sabb, Keon Sabb's little brother, older brother to Xavier Sabb, who was a prospect in the 2027 class. He committed to Alabama yesterday, and I wanted to get your thoughts on him. He's kind of a lower rated player, 3-star. But, when you turn on the tape, I mean, he was very, very productive in high school, very productive. And so I do think he can help Alabama. What are your thoughts on this addition for the Crimson Tide?
Yeah, on the one hand, you have to be realistic. I mean, very rarely does the 1500th ranked prospect in the country help a program like Alabama. He's short. He's probably 5'8" at best. And he fits the profile of a guy that's probably not going to be a significant player. Probably not. But here's why I'm excited, for a few reasons, of why Amari could be possibly an exception to those kind of rules. Number one, as Clint pointed out, highly productive player. I mean, rushing yards, receiving yards, kind of reminded me a little bit of Jeremy Bernard in that way. Now, he is in no way like Jeremy Bernard because he's not built anything like him. But I'm just saying, in terms of this is a kid that's probably, the best receiver on the team, the best running back on the team, the best gadget player on the team. He's that kind of guy. Excellent in the return game as well. And maybe if he makes a splash at Alabama, maybe his best shot is maybe as a punt returner. But what I like about Amari particularly is instincts and just the ability to separate. When he has the ball in his hands, he runs away from defenders, and I'm not talking about the front seven guys. He runs away from DBs. He outruns DBs that have angles. He clearly has good speed. Now, if he was a 4-3 type guy, then even at 5'8", he would be offered and heavily recruited by a lot more big-time programs. So I'm not saying he's a blazer by SEC standards, but he can run. I love the instincts and how he runs to daylight. And in the end, Clint, if this was the 85 scholarship era, maybe this is a thing that doesn't happen, even though he's got an older brother on the team and a younger brother who's a star, when it comes to the recruiting industry. But with 105 scholarships and a need for depth at receiver, this is a home run to me. I mean, I would say even home run. If the needs are, look, we got 105 spots. And secondly, we need depth at receiver. We don't need somebody. We don't need a freshman to come in and play right away. We got Ryan, we got Lottie, we got Noah Rogers, C.D. Morgan. That is all covered. What we need is depth in the room, and a kid that would be excited to get the scholarship, because we're not going to have a lot of rev share here for him, and we're filling out wide receiver 7, 8, 9, 10. I think a fun game to play, Clint. It would be fun. What if I told you that I've seen into the future, and one of MJ Mathis, Aubrey Walker, and Amari Sabb, one of them's going to be good. And I think there's a good chance. I mean, they're all three kind of lower ranked, lower rated kids. But hey, a percentage of those kids do pan out, even at the Power 4 level. I'm not going to be surprised. What I'm saying is, if at least one of them's good, and a fun game is predicting who, I'm not so sure it's not Amari watching the tape, just because I see a real instinctive kid that when he has the ball in his hands, he's going to be a little dangerous even at the SEC level.
That is 100% accurate. And he's productive. And this coaching staff has talked about production. He's been productive in a variety of ways. I remember, and granted, this was before I really followed it and really kept up. Well, I did follow it, but not to the extent that I do now. But if I recall, Robert Lester, when they got him, there was some accusations that he was targeted simply because of Julio Jones. And he proved to be a guy who kind of stood on his own 2 feet. And granted, I understand it was a little bit different. You know, he was a 3-star. I think some places might have even had him as a 4-star. I don't remember. Obviously, there wasn't as many back then, but he wasn't nearly as highly rated. Those accusations happened. Will Oakley is another one who I want to say, didn't he go to Tim Tebow's high school? And
He
was
did. He played with Tim at Nice.
Yeah. So, and there was some accusation. And granted, I'm not saying that stuff doesn't go on. I'm saying that sometimes you end up offering those players, and yes, it's an added benefit that there's some connections there, it can help you with other guys. But a lot of those guys end up standing on their own 2 feet, or some of those guys end up standing
Will
on their
was
own.
good. Will was good. I mean,
He was.
he
He really was.
He was a good player.
So that's one where, you can say what you want to. He ended up, producing and contributing at Alabama. So did Robert Lester. And at one point, there was one season where Lester had like 7 interceptions, I believe.
It's like led the league in interceptions one year.
Yeah. So, I mean, to sit here and say that, who's to say that some of these guys can end up being those types of players? I mean, we've seen walk-on caliber players emerge as really good, Levi Wallace,
Rashad Johnson.
Rashad Johnson's another one.
Who this kid reminds me of? I should have mentioned it.
Yeah, go ahead.
It just kind of hit me like I'm thinking of a comp. This might be pretty accurate too. And this kid did contribute. This is a while back, might be in the way back machine for you. Remember Brandon Brooks?
Yes.
You might not remember him.
No, undersized guy. Very undersized.
Kind of a punt returner type guy, played receiver. He could run. I mean, he could run really well. And he was a great player at Alabama, but he played in the games. And I think, I think Amari Sabb might be kind of similar to him.
Man, I love that. And then granted, I would need to go back and watch more of Brandon Brooks because once again, that's been quite a while.
It's been a while. I think it was the Dubose era, I think.
Yeah. But I remember, we're number 5.
I think that's
number
right.
5. Yeah.
If I recall. Exactly right. Yeah, you did.
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely remember him. It's just, I like the fact that we were talking about filling out some of the numbers at wide receiver. Now they're sitting with 10. I like the top of the depth chart, obviously, with Ryan Williams and Lottie Brooks and Noah Rogers and Rico Scott and Derek Meadows and potentially CD Morgan. Like, they can run pretty deep with some of this, but they also have, some young guys who could end up developing. And as you mentioned, it's not just about wide receiver. It's also about helping on special teams. And I think that all 3 of these guys, to a certain extent, they add an explosiveness, right, as potential return men. Do they continue to go the Cole Adams route at punt returner where it's like, just make sure you filled the punt and that's what you're going to be doing 96% of the time? Or do they want a little bit more of a dynamic presence, someone that could focus on that, get a lot better at that, and become like their mastered skill? And I really feel like Amari Sabb could end up being that type of player. Well, as you mentioned, not the most, he's not an elite athlete, like the top of the tier, top of the line type of athlete, but he's a really, really good athlete. And so, yes, he's a little bit undersized, but there was a guy for LSU that was also really undersized, and he's not that caliber of athlete, but I think Trendon Holiday was his name.
Trendon Holiday, yeah.
But that's one of those where it ended up being a huge return specialist type of guy. So you just never know. I like the addition. I think it's important, and it certainly doesn't hurt when you have 2 of the Sabb brothers connected to your program when you're trying to recruit an elite caliber, blue chip caliber Xavier Sabb. Does not mean that Alabama is going to get the youngest Sabb brother. That's not what we're saying. This didn't automatically put Alabama in a position, but I certainly think it doesn't hurt. Exactly. And that tells you the fact that he was willing to come. It tells you Keon Sabb must have had a pretty good experience in his couple of years in Tuscaloosa so far. He could have gone to the NFL draft, and if he wasn't happy going to the NFL draft, he could have entered the transfer portal, and yet he will be returning to Alabama for yet another season, and now he's going to be playing alongside one of his brothers. That's very cool, because if he had left for the NFL, he wouldn't have got that opportunity. So I'm excited for that family, and they seem pretty committed to Kalen DeBoer and the University of Alabama, so that's certainly great to see. You got anything else on Sabb before we move on?
Yeah, Keon is a great guy. I mean, for those that aren't too familiar with the inner workings of the locker room, Keon's a great guy. He's a major leader on the team and a major candidate to be a captain on this upcoming football team. He's one of the great leaders. He's smart as heck. So it's not a stretch to assume Amari is cut from the same cloth. So they're adding another great locker room guy. And for those who just want to focus on rankings, I get it. I'm not telling you to discard that. It is important, but we do need to shift and how we look at things based on, it's not the 85 world anymore. It's the 105 world. It's the 105 world. And no one, not Texas, not Ohio State, not Georgia, no one is signing 105 blue chippers. You simply cannot afford it. No one is doing that. There has to be guys that fill out the team. And if you can go get a guy that you're filling out the team who possibly has a chance to help you, I mean, that's the home run, right? That's what I see in Amari. Is I completely understand the take in the 105 world. Maybe this guy can help you. I mean, he
That's
certainly
right.
comes from the right intangibles. And when you watch the tape, you got to like how this kid finds daylight and runs to it.
Who Keenan Allen, he had a teammate or a sibling, or I think
Brother.
it was a teammate, a brother. Yeah. And in Alabama, Nick Saban wouldn't take his brother, right? Wasn't that a big storyline with that?
Yeah, the brother was a quarterback and actually played college football at Buffalo and was going to transfer and play for the same school that his hotshot, superstar, five-star younger brother, half-brother Keenan Allen was going to play. But Alabama was full at quarterback, and this kid probably wasn't the type that would even be good enough to be in the Alabama 4 deep. That was back in the 85 scholarship era too. You didn't have
Correct.
the extra 20 scholarships to give. I do believe Alabama wanted Keenan so bad, kind of last minute, Alabama kind of came up with a gray shirt type offer, but it wasn't enough. Cal offered not only Keenan Allen a good opportunity, but Cal was going to give an opportunity to brother to potentially be the starting quarterback there, because Cal just wasn't Alabama. Interesting sidelight to that. A lot of Alabama fans don't remember this or know this. Do you know the assistant coach that recruited Keenan Allen's brother to Cal over Alabama?
Who?
Tosh Lupoy.
Really? That's interesting. And now he's the head coach.
Now he's the head coach at Cal.
Yeah, that's very cool. But I feel like that maybe that situation, Nick Saban probably would have felt a lot more comfortable extending an offer like an 86 to 105 range type of offer to someone like that, where it's like,
Yes.
hey, this is a better than a walk-on caliber player. We also don't have really a spot as far as what makes sense, as far as we've got 85 of these. They're, highly coveted. The guys got to be able to fit. They got to make sense from the other pieces that you have on the roster. But when you have that 86 to 105, you can get a guy free education. You can give him an opportunity to come in. And so maybe Keenan Allen would have ended up, Keenan Allen would have ended up in a Crimson uniform potentially had they, Nick Saban had these opportunities back then. But at the same time, once again, these aren't your typical, right now we need to come up, there needs to be a new term. Someone that's not what I would consider to be a true 85 guy, a guy that I feel like would be in Tuscaloosa regardless if it was at 85 or 105, but then also not your typical walk-on. It's like there's this middle tier where these things start to make a lot of sense, whether it be from a financial standpoint for the player, like he gets to go get a free education in a lot of these instances. I do think there's some times where maybe you're not even on a regular scholarship. I don't know if do you have to give everybody in the 86 to 105 a scholarship?
You do not have to.
Okay, but you can.
You can give up to 105 scholarships. You can choose to only give out 20, but you can give out 105, no more than 105, but you don't have to give out the full 105. Another thing that can happen, I don't think Alabama's doing it with football. I don't think so. But under the new rules, you can also give partial scholarships. In the 85 era, that didn't happen. It was full or nothing. Now it can be. Yeah. Now it can be partial in football. So those things can happen. I love the idea of coming up with a term. The one that comes to mind for me that just like immediately is we have all these terms: red shirts, gray shirts, blue shirts, gray shirts and blue shirts. That's all done because of the new rules. But I like the color shirt thing. Maybe we should just go with crimson shirt.
Yeah.
He's a crimson shirt, which means 85 to 105 scholarship only. No rev share, no NIL package.
I like that. I also wouldn't mind, rearranging, scholarship player, meaning it's a player on scholarship, and NIL player is a player who is getting a portion of the NIL rev share. And then a walk on is someone who is still part of that 105, obviously, but not on scholarship.
Yep. And that does happen. That does
100%.
happen. We still are getting some pure walk-ons who aren't even getting scholarship. They're just on the 105 roster. One other, I want to mention this because I know, some people are interested in this. because there was a sudden change in the rules that affected the walk-ons. If you were a walk-on already on the team, you were not cut as a result of these new rules. Those guys were grandfathered in. So right now, Alabama actually has a little more than 105 because a handful of walk-ons on the team are still on the team at the time of the rule change. Those are called DSAs, designated student athletes. That means you're designated as a walk-on prior to the rule change. You're free to remain a walk-on, or they can give you a scholarship if they choose, but they're free to remain a walk-on even though it puts you over the 105. Now, as each cycle passes, those guys will cycle out. We're probably 2 or 3 years away from actually it being a hard 105 cap at that point.
Correct. And MJ Churgwin is one that was a walk-on formerly, probably entered because he knew, like, he had done enough where he was kind of, you could tell he probably was a threshold above the typical walk-on, and he enters the transfer portal and ends up securing himself a scholarship. Don't think he's got any sort of NIL funding to return, but they did put him on scholarship, and had it been capped at 85, don't know that he would have gotten that opportunity.
Perfect example.
Yes, and that's an experienced guy who does bring a little something to your room. So while, this isn't the, once again, as we talk about all the time, this isn't the Nick Saban's Alabama where you're just going to go have 85 pretty much bona fide studs to an extent, where it's either established studs or guys who have a lot of potential and talent, and then a lot of underrated 3-stars who are going to be competing to fill out your depth. You're going to have more flexibility there, but that can also really help you. It gives you more opportunities to take some swings and find some diamonds in the rough, some guys who are late developers, some guys who, typically wouldn't have gotten these opportunities. But it also, you still, with the way that you have to kind of structure things, I don't even know if Alabama, like, just because you're what I would consider like an 85 guy, someone who would have been in the 85, it doesn't automatically mean you're getting any rev share or any significant rev share. Alabama might be, more so like the top, and this is just hypothetical, but like the top 60 or the top 65 guys are the ones that are really putting all of their NIL funds towards, and then really at 66 beyond or at 71 beyond, that's really getting more of scholarship or walk-on opportunities. That might be the structure of it.
I believe that is accurate too. I mean, those numbers might not even be far off. I think that's probably true. You got your big time, big rev share, big NIL, but you've only got a handful of those guys, or I'll say a handful, 40, 50,
right.
Of those guys. The rest will be on scholarship and less of that because there's just simply not enough to go. And if you think about, if you got 16 million in rev share, that's all you have to give out. If you divide that by 105, you're not going to be able to go sign the big 5-star type guys. You have to have big rev share numbers available for the 5-star type guys. So the fewer guys that are getting rev share, the more money they're getting. Some schools, like for instance at Texas Tech, they might only have about 20 guys getting rev share because they're giving them multiple millions,
right.
And it eats up their 16 million. They've only got about 20 guys, but hey, you keep them healthy and your lineup's as good as anybody,
Well, and that's something else that I kind of wanted to talk about or address because, there has been some massive concern as far as, Kalen DeBoer and the way that this roster is structured. And okay, you're going after elite high school players. That's fine. But all that's going to happen is you're going to develop them for somebody else. They're going to go somewhere else. And I saw this, way offsides Cotton. He does a great job. And he more so is, I think, presenting it from this is what fans' concerns are and what are y'all's solutions to these potential problems. Yeah. And so while I addressed his tweet, it wasn't directed at him. It was more so anybody that has these concerns, I want to give the other side of it. And that is, who has Kalen DeBoer lost, this coaching staff lost, that they specifically recruited to Alabama and wanted in Tuscaloosa? It's Noah Carter, who I initially missed when I was talking about it, but that absolutely, it's a great example. But once again, this is a guy who is going into year 3, was still 3rd on the depth chart. So you're not going to retain all of those guys. Nick Saban's not retaining all of those guys. It's about keeping, you're always going to lose a couple of pieces like that. It's about keeping a huge chunk of those pieces. but more so all of the elite talent that Alabama has brought in under Kalen DeBoer and this coaching staff, other than Noah Carter, and the one that I did mention was Micah DeBose. And even he was, I would, at this point, he was higher rated than Mal Waldrop, but he was fourth amongst that class's offensive line, because Mal Waldrop, I think, was far exceeding expectations.
Correct. That's my understanding as well.
So, that's one of those things where he was, he was only entering year 2. Sure, you'd like for him to stick around. I still think he's got talent. I still think he could end up doing some good things, but I'm also not surprised that that's how that ended up, turning out. But when you look at really just this roster in general, they're bringing, think about all the different examples. And this is what I used on Twitter. Think about, Ryan Williams. Everybody was saying, oh, with the season he just had and how awful it was, no way he's back in Tuscaloosa in 2026. Well, he's going to be back in Tuscaloosa in 2026. You look at other positions. You look at cornerback with Chuck McDonald. Man, you're returning both of your 2 starters in Dijon Lee and Xavier Brown, and you brought in competition for cornerback 3, not only in Carmelo O'Neal, a transfer from Mercer, but you also brought in a 5-star talent in Jordan Edmonds and Zion Gibson, another top 100 recruit. And a lot of people would have looked at Chuck McDonald based off of that. You're not going to move up in year 2. In fact, in some ways, it's possible that you continue to be where you were at. You don't even become cornerback 3. He's definitely gone. No, he's going to be back in 2026. You look at guys like Zay Mincy and Ivan Taylor, and you get both of your 2 starters back in Keon Sabb and Bray Hubbard. Zay Mincy is now going to be entering year 3. I got to be honest with you, Jimmy. There's even a part of me with that circumstance, I wouldn't have been shocked if he would have entered the transfer portal.
I kind of expected it to happen, frankly. I expected it to happen. It didn't. That's a great job selling him on playing time and development.
That's 100% right. And same with Ivan Taylor would only be going into year 2, but that's another one where, okay, and Zay Mincy didn't leave. So now it's possible that where you were really on the depth chart in 2025 is where you're going to be in 2026. There's no way you get Zay Mincy and Ivan Taylor back. They're getting both of those guys back. There's so many players. A.K. Deere is another one. You return 2 of your top 3 backs from a year ago or in 2025, plus you're adding an elite talent in Xavier Crowell, who everybody expects to get on campus and immediately contribute or maybe compete for a starting job. And A.K. Deere is a former top 100 recruit, didn't get much run as a freshman. A lot of people would say, well, that's a guy that you're not going to get a chance to develop. He's going to bail because he's not playing. Well, that's not true at all. He's coming back. He's going to run it back. I think he's going to be a big part of the backfield. Don't get me wrong. But I'm saying that everybody keeps thinking, oh, if you recruit elite players from the high school ranks, all you're going to do is you'll keep some, but you'll lose some guys because you can't afford them. They're just going to go chase the bag. There's a lot of guys giving Alabama discounts who are already on campus who want to be a part of this program. And there's other players. So you would sit there and say, because he's not playing, he's definitely gone after 1 year, or he's definitely gone after 2 years, and they're coming back. So you've lost 2 players up to this point, Noah Carter and Micah DeBose, in 2 full recruiting. Well, I guess 1 real full recruiting cycle. And then the 2 guys that he was able to either bring in post Nick Saban or had to re-recruit, like Ryan Williams. You lost 1, you kept 1. So this idea that, roster retention and that's going to be a huge problem. In my opinion, the formula that they're currently trying to implement, which is high school rankings, bring those guys in, bring in the guys that you want, see who is worth keeping. Not everybody is going to deserve raises and everything, but the ones that you got to make sure you retain, they're retaining those at a very high level. And then the ones who maybe don't, it's like, well, at that point, you can fill in gaps where needed with the transfer portal. There's been nothing up to this point, not saying that things won't develop differently down the road, but how can you assume that's the way it is when nothing up to this point has suggested, at least for Alabama and Kalen DeBoer, that is going to be the way that it is?
It's a true statement when people say it is true. Like when you're signing these high school kids, all you're doing is developing them, and then they're going to go start somewhere else. We can name examples. That is true. That does happen, and it's going to continue to happen. If your focus is high school play, that's going to happen. There's almost nothing you can do to stop that. However, what you have to realize is that's not the case for all of the kids or even most of the kids. And where would Alabama be right now without Keelan Russell, A.K. Deere, E.J. Crowell, C.D. Morgan, Ryan Williams, Lottie Brooks, Caleb Edwards, Marshall Pritchett, Michael Carroll, Jackson Lloyd? That's just on offense. I even got to defense, Bray Hubbard, I mean, Zabian Brown, Dijon Lee, Jan Zapier. Where would London Simmons? Those are all players Alabama signed as high school prospects that are not only still on the team, they're stars on this team and their future. They haven't left. They're still there. And I know we can name, but Keon Keeley left. I get that. I was disappointed too. And that's a good example of a guy that you spent 3 years investing in, 3 years developing, and he's go somewhere else. He's probably going to be a pretty good player at Notre Dame, thanks to a lot of the work Alabama put in. So I get the frustration, but that's one guy. More kids stay. Most kids aren't leaving, particularly the ones they're high on. As Clint pointed out, the ones they're investing in, the ones they're handpicking, the ones they're investing in, most of them stay. So that's why I don't like the argument of recruiting high school guys a waste of time. One other fact, pull up the 2026 high school team rankings, where I think Alabama finished 5th in the Rivals team rankings. Pull up the top 10. Who finished in the top 10? Playoff teams, the best teams in college football. I mean, Alabama's not alone in emphasizing high school recruiting. All of the good programs are. There are very few who emphasize the portal and not high school recruiting that are doing well. Some of them are, like in Indiana, and I know they're very high profile right now, but others who emphasize the portal are nowhere near the playoff. Like, for instance, Florida State.
They're one, 100%. And so, like, that's kind of, once again, you can build your roster the way that Alabama is building its roster. It's going to take that, like, you are going to look at 2026 and say, well, 2027 might be more of the competitive year. When I say more competitive, meaning depending on how things work out, it's still way too soon to say, but how things are working out, I look at 2027 and I think Alabama will be a national championship contending team. 2026, I say they will be a playoff contending team. Now, that could end up changing if certain things go right, certain things start to click. Don't want to get locked in early February as far as any sort of prediction on that front, but that's how more so I'm viewing it. But everybody will say, well, that's dumb to do it that way, because you're not going to get a chance to get to 2027. All these guys that you've recruited and invested in, they're all going to be gone. Keon Keeley was given 3 years. He had a year to develop under Nick Saban. He had a year where he didn't really contribute under Kane Womack. And everybody said after that year, the fact that he was a second-year player, had gone through 2 years, was not really making any sort of moves, there's no way you're getting him back in 2025. No, not that caliber of player, former number 2 overall recruit, not happening. He gave Alabama another year. And yes, he started to climb. Yes, he started to do better. But he didn't turn into a superstar who entered the transfer portal. He was making this rise very incremental, but he was climbing. And it could be a situation where he gets to Notre Dame and he finally is ready to be that player or some version of that player. And that will suck. That won't be fun. But let's not act like that once he reached superstar status for Alabama, then they couldn't retain him. They couldn't hang on to him. If he would have been a superstar, they would have done what was necessary to keep him on this roster. They saw a guy who was going to rotate. They saw him as a guy who's going to be an important piece for their defense, but they didn't view him as a featured key piece, a must-retain player. They didn't view him that way. So we got to stop acting like he is that caliber of player. And if he ends up turning into that, well, you can sit here and say, oh, I knew that was coming. No, you didn't, because you were saying that was going to happen in year 2. You were saying it was going to happen in year 3. Neither one of those two things happened either. So, I mean, you finally got it right. But, I mean, it's kind of like me with Justin Jefferson. Can I take victory laps with Justin Jefferson because I was predicting him 2 years ago to be this dude? No, I can't do it. It took him a little while. And it took him getting an extra year of eligibility, or he never.
I'll give you partial credit there. Credit there.
But I'll give anybody that gets the Keon Keeley thing right. I mean, I don't think it's crazy to suggest that he could end up becoming that guy because of the talent and the ability and the fact that he is taking those steps. But if he needs to take a sizable step, he went from almost no step between year 1 and year 2 to starting to make incremental, very small steps year 2 to year 3. If he just makes small steps again and from year 3 to year 4, he's going to be searching to come back for a 5th year because he's not going to be NFL caliber by that point. He's going to have to take a big step forward to become that dude. But I still think he's going to contribute because he was already contributing for Alabama, and I think he's turning into a pretty good player. But people just assume that is a very common thing and everybody's going to be doing it. No, I mean, Lottie Brooks is a guy who came in as a freshman. He was lower rated. They probably got a pretty good deal on him as far as, financially, but he turns into a freshman contributor, someone who flashed absolute brilliance. He ended up sticking around. He was taken care of. The quarterback situation, they figured out a way, despite the fact that a lot of people kept saying there's no way everybody kept saying, if you don't play Keelan Russell as a freshman, he's gone. There's no way he's coming back in year 2. You, as a freshman, you got to play. Is he back or is he not back? I mean, and now they're saying if he doesn't play in year 2, oh, he's 100% gone. I still don't think you can say that. I mean, because next year it's the same situation as he was approaching this year, which is, okay, didn't end up playing as a freshman, but now that I can actually enter the portal, now I'm expected to be the starter. If Austin Mack ends up being the starter, Austin Mack ends up being, just like I said last year with Ty Simpson, is good enough to remain your starter, but not good enough to move on to the NFL, then maybe we can start to have a conversation about Keelan, if he is going to be the automatic starter in 2027. But there are a lot of situations where Keelan Russell ends up losing the battle this year. Austin Mack is good enough. He decides to leave after this year, and Keelan is locked in. Do you want to go compete somewhere, or do you want to stay here where you've been in the same system for multiple years and maybe and be the likely Alabama starter in 2027? Like, it just, people get very over dramatic about how these things operate.
You can't assume.
Correct.
You can't assume too much. I know there's one thing, you can call this an assumption, but I think I'm so high on Keelan that if Austin Mack beats out Keelan Russell and is good enough to do that, and is Alabama's starting quarterback this fall, then I would anticipate Austin Mack probably heading to the NFL like Ty Simpson did. If he's good enough to beat out Keelan, he's probably good enough to go pro early. So why would Keelan leave to go be the starter somewhere else when he'd be the starter here? I think that in other words, I think the best odds are Keelan winning the job. The second best odds are Austin Mack being so good that he's good enough to leave for the NFL after this fall, and then Keelan's a starter in 20s. I think the least likely thing is that Austin's good enough to beat out Keelan, but not good enough to go to the NFL, and he comes back in 2020. So I see that as the least likely happen. But hey, do I know what's going to happen? I wish I did. I would just spend all my time on FanDuel making money and not here talking to my pals on the internet.
I mean, and that's so why assume the worst? That's the part of it. If I'm over here like, oh, if I sit here and say, oh, I'm assuming that Keelan Russell is going to be the starter. Well, okay, it's still an assumption. I think it's a pretty educated assumption. Now, granted, I'm not there. I do have Keelan as my favorite, but I don't phrase it as, oh, I'm assuming he's going to start for Alabama. But my point is, if I'm doing that, that's okay. That's still an assumption. You still have zero guarantee of being right. But why make all the assumptions that are like worst case scenario about your own team and your own program? The world's falling apart. Everything's going to be just absolutely terrible. That's never made sense to me. I react to what I know.
Especially at Alabama. Most of the time things work out. I know people don't feel that way because not everyone's glass is half full. I get that about everyone's going to have a different, but at Alabama, it usually works out pretty well. Usually does. Not always. Usually.
And that's the thing too, is like, I will address when there are red flags, if there are signs. We'll talk about that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, this automatically means this. It's just like with the offensive line coach, which is a great segue. We're going to be talking about Clint here in just a second. But it's just like the offensive line coach. I continuously said, I think they should go in a different direction. I think it's time to go in a different direction. But if they choose not to do that, I'm going to disagree with it. I'm going to say that I disagree with it. And if you're going to do that, that's fine. You just better be right. We better be sitting here talking about this and saying, you know what, I'm so glad you guys didn't make a move because you were 100% correct. They're much improved despite keeping the same guy in place. But I still was going to say, well, I'm just not going to assume because they're electing to retain Coach Cap, everything's terrible. Everything's just going to be, this is a terrible, everything's falling apart. There's way too much loyalty. The offensive line's going to be garbage. I still would have been approaching it. There are scenarios where it's still bad. But there are plenty of scenarios where because of the talent, the amount of turnover that you had and having the right fit where things improve despite keeping the same guy. So I'm not going to just jump to the conclusion that everything's going to be sky is falling. It's not how my brain works. It's not how I operate. If something catastrophic happens, if there's a major injury, if Tua Tagovailoa goes down against Mississippi State, I'm not going to jump on here and have great assumptions. I'm not going to get on here and be like, oh, well, maybe he'll be back next week. We just don't know. I mean, he was carted off the field. That was going to be, we can react to that bad news and we can talk about how bad it is, but we're not making assumptions. It's fact at that point. And so that's kind of another rant. I see it so much on Twitter, and I don't understand constantly going there. I have certain people that respond to every single one of my tweets, and the only time they say anything is when they got something negative to say. And it's not about me. They just have something critical or some shot to take. And it's like, if you're truly an Alabama fan, find something good to say. Not saying that you can't criticize somebody, but good heavens, if you were like somebody that was, half the tweets
like go ahead. Describing last season. If your description of last season is only got blown out by Indiana, got blown out by Georgia, lost 4 games, embarrassed by Florida State, and that's your description of the season, that's crazy. When Alabama literally won the SEC regular season, was the number 1 seed. They won 7 SEC games. At one point, I think they won something like 10 of 11 games against a top 5 schedule, I might add, a top 5 schedule, beat Georgia and Athens, might have been one of maybe the best road win of the year in college football. Not only make the playoff, win a game in the playoff. The 2 of the teams you lost to, you also beat.
Correct.
You have to. But you can't also describe the season just in those terms.
Correct.
It was the good and the bad. But those that just want to talk about the bad, you're ignoring facts. Those that just want to talk about the good, you're ignoring facts. It's a complicated thing. It's not so simple as everything's great or everything's terrible.
And that's one, talking about the offensive line. Once again, I can see scenarios where it all works out great. And I tend to want to lean towards those scenarios. Those are the ones that I gravitate towards. Yeah. I can also see plenty of scenarios, and I continuously address that side of it where it does not work out and the inexperience ends up being a huge problem. And, Adrian Clem from an offensive line hire ends up not being what it needs to be. And you end up seeing continued regression or continued subpar disappointing play along your offensive front. These are realistic possibilities, but I am encouraged by some of the things that I see, and I can see plenty of scenarios where it works out well. And speaking of Adrian Clem, that official has now been made, that a hire has now been made official by Yay, Alabama. And so I'm very encouraged about this offensive line hire. What do you think, Jimmy?
Yeah. Again, my first thought of Coach Clem in particular is this: look who's hired him. I mean, when Bill Belichick hired him to coach his offensive line in the NFL, Mike Tomlin offered him the opportunity to coach his offensive line. Those are not just NFL coaches. Those are Hall of Fame NFL coaches. One day, I know, long story there, but one day Belichick will be in the Hall of Fame. And I think one day Mike Tomlin will be in the NFL Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame coaches have hired him. And you're like, yeah, but what about the college game? Dan Lanning hired him. Who's
Jim Mora.
Jim Mora is he's a good college football coach with NFL and college experience. But Dan Lanning at Oregon, one of the elite programs, hired him. So this is an elite hire. Now, you could poke some holes in a resume just like anyone else. And I know he was just at USC as a defensive analyst, and that can also be explained a little bit. But point being, I love who's hired him. It's an elite hire. He's got, he was a great player on 3 Super Bowl teams, I think. When he was at Oregon, last coaching college football, Clint, top 10 offense that not only threw it well, they were top 10 rushing offense, when he was at Oregon in 2022. So this is a quality hire. Now, does that mean automatically that Alabama's offensive line overnight is going to be great? Probably not, because you're really building an offensive line from scratch with a lot of new pieces, both from the portal and from high school recruiting. And he's just getting here. Well, I'm setting my expectation. What I would like to see is improvement.
Right.
Be better than you were, even with the new faces. Be better. Those that are like, okay, well, if you don't win the Joe Moore Award in year 1, I don't think we hired the right guy. You're never going to make people like that happy. but I do think that you hire the right guy to improve the situation. That's what I'm expecting, and I think moderate improvement in year one is reasonable.
And that should be the expectation. Moving in the right direction. Alabama's offensive line, in my opinion, hasn't really been moving in the right direction in several years, dating back to the Nick Saban era and the way that ended.
2021, really.
And so I just want to see movement back in the right direction. Or am I expecting all these new faces to step in and just the product that you see is just light years ahead of where it was in 2025? And in some fans' minds, it needs to be light years ahead for Alabama to take any sort of significant step forward. I disagree. I think that when things are operating correctly and you've got the right personnel and you are as diverse as they want to be offensively as far as different types of run games. Like it's not just a zone-based scheme. It's not just a gap blocking scheme. It is more, or excuse me, man blocking scheme. It is more of we throw a lot at you. And when you can execute that and defenses are it puts them on their heels. Your offensive line from a pass protection standpoint is automatically improved because A, you're living in more favorable situations, and B, you also a lot of east-west, a lot of, just the way that it operates is going to strain defenses, especially guys up front, and it's going to not allow them to pin their ears back and get after your quarterback as much. That's going to automatically help or aid your offensive line. I want to see a little bit more consistency from the group. And that consistency might be, well, it's pretty good. It's not elite. I mean, consistency to me is just, well, it was so much of, and maybe you can say that it was consistent. It was just consistently bad as far as the inability to, consistently get guys blocked in the run game. But I mean more so of get to a standard where we saw flashes of it at times, but then you live in those flashes and then you continuously get better. Have it moving in the right direction. That's what I'm hoping to see. And I think Adrian Clem is more than capable of providing that. And I know a lot of Alabama fans want to push back on, at Oregon, he had a bunch of returning guys and it wasn't really he stepped into a good situation. And we can acknowledge that. That is something that is worth talking about because that is true. He also recruited extremely well at Oregon. They certainly didn't want him walking out the door. But, the thing is, you also have to provide context for the New England side of it, where you had at least 3 or 4 different players at every position other than center starting that season for the Patriots. None of them are still really starters. I think there's one, but Cole Strange was a guy that they had drafted in the first round. They expected him to be a dude. They needed him to be a dude. And he was in and out of the lineup because he was just at poor play. He was entering year 2. He should have been much better. He wasn't. He's with the Miami Dolphins, if I'm not mistaken now. I do think that he started some for them, but do we really think
he was a reach draft pick at the time, too? I remember when they took him, the Patriots were criticized a little bit I think you just took a third-round guy in the first round.
And that's, people did the Cowboys the same way with Travis Frederick, and that ended up being a Hall of Fame caliber pick. And so, you want to give guys chances, but he never panned out. And even in Miami, I think he ended up getting some starts this past season, but is Miami's offensive line one that we're going to, hang our hats on and say, man, they had a subpar personnel to a point where he actually, I think, had a confrontation with a front office member, Adrian Clem did, over that because he felt like that they had not positioned him as far as giving, because he has no say. He can't go recruit guys. He can't go bring guys in. It's someone saying, this is your group, coach it. And so it is different. And then when you have no say over what you're given, Bill Belichick did. Bill Belichick was the GM as well. He had direct connection as far as that is concerned. Adrian Clem had no control. And all he could do was coach what he had, and he was given next to nothing. So if you're at least going to add the context to Oregon, add the context to New England side of it as well. Because, once again, there's middle grounds to all of this, and we have to be able to acknowledge all of it. I like the hire. Think it's going to end up being a good hire, but that's one that's, once again, remains to be seen. The last thing I want to talk about is, some of the comments that Ryan Grubb made. And now, if you want to talk about some of the things that Kalen DeBoer has also said, that's totally fine. But the first one that I want to discuss is him pretty much saying that he feels like Alabama has 2 elite quarterbacks in Keelan Russell and Austin Mack. What was your reaction to that statement from Ryan Grubb?
Well, it was a little much for me. He didn't come out and say they're the 2 best quarterbacks in college football. I guess that wasn't exactly the quote. I think you shouldn't set expectations so high. I mean, what I would encourage all coaches to do, not just Coach Grubb, but all coaches, is sort of like undersell and over deliver is probably the best way, as opposed to overselling and under delivering. I don't think, I'll tell you who I think are elite quarterbacks in 2026. Dante Moore, Julian Sand, Arch Manning. I see them as elite quarterbacks in 2026. I don't know that I'm going to say that about guys who haven't really played. I think it's getting carried away. On the other hand, and this is, I think, a critical point here. 1 year ago, everybody that listened to me, I raved about Ty Simpson to the point I was kind of criticized for it, for raving about Ty, who hadn't done much, and when he did play, it wasn't that great at South Florida, and I was really high on Ty. And it wasn't just because I had a gut feeling or anything like that, or was relying on high school tape. I was relying on actual evidence. And one of the pieces of evidence that made me believe Ty was going to be as good is the fact that the coaches had worked with him in practice and seen him in practice, and when it became apparent that he was going to be the starter, they didn't go to the portal. Right. They had the money. They had the money. They could do it. They could go get a big name. They didn't. They liked what they had. They had two opportunities. The back then, the winter portal and the spring portal. Ty was the starter throughout, or the starter in essence, throughout the entirety of spring practice. After the spring, they could have pushed somebody in the portal or gone to get someone in the portal. They didn't. That's one of the reasons I was really high on Ty before he ever played. Here we are 1 year later. They've done the same thing. They've worked with Austin Mack for a while. They've worked with Keelan for a while now. They could have gone to the portal and spent money and been in the Sam Levitt sweepstakes if they wanted to, if they felt like we need a difference maker quarterback. We're not good enough. They clearly like what they have. Now, does that 100% mean that both of these kids, or one of them, is going to pan out and be a great player? Of course not. But it's actual evidence from the coaches that have worked with them every day that they really believe in them. It's not just talk. It's not just Ryan Grubb saying what he said. It's actions. They didn't. They were not involved in the portal with any significant quarterback because they like what they have, even though the guys haven't played them a lot. So in and of itself, that gives me a lot of hope. In terms of what Coach Grubb said, I kind of, he's kind of putting a lot on them there before they've played. So I'm not as crazy about the quote, but I agree with this quote that, we know what Keelan's ceiling is. And I think Austin Mack, in some ways, is kind of one of these quarterbacks made in the lab. In terms of what you would want your quarterback to look like and be like. So I'm excited about the quarterback position. I really am. I just thought Grubb's comments got a little carried away.
That is a fair way to look at it. It's putting a little bit of unnecessary pressure on your guys. And I agree. The thing, like the difference between that and like an Arch Manning type of situation is it was universal with Arch. Like you had everybody that was he was already an elite quarterback before he had ever really played or been relied on full time. He had gotten some starts, but it was more so against lower competition, and just everybody kind of crowned him as the Heisman favorite and stuff. And a lot of that was based off a last name. Even if he had put the exact same things on tape the previous year, but he had a different last name, everybody would have said, well, this guy is very encouraging. This guy had some really encouraging moments. This guy's a former 5-star recruit, but no one would have put him as the Heisman favorite going into last year had his last name not been Manning. And that was unfair. And how did it turn out? Started off not great. Fell well short of expectations. I think some of that was through no fault of Arch Manning, because that offensive line was absolutely atrocious. It was awful. And so it was hard to do anything as far as running the football. Texas, in a lot of ways, they were dealing with similar to what, Alabama was, as far as not being able to establish any sort of consistent run game. Like Texas went out there and they completely changed their backfield. They added a Relique Brown. They added a Hollywood Smothers. They made sure to shore up their offensive line. But they had talent. It wasn't working. And they did. The difference is that I don't know if you remember this, but Steve Sarkisian at the beginning of last season, he got really frustrated because it felt like that there were some clips of Arch Manning going to throw the football and he was wincing in pain, and people were asking questions like, is he hurt? And as a coach, there's this fine line of, man, I'm kind of letting my quarterback be thrown to the wolves here because he is playing injured. He's playing hurt. and he's not 100%, then that's absolutely affecting his play. And so, like, people are assuming that it's just based off of poor performance, but there's other factors involved. But at the same time, you also don't want to announce to future opponents that your quarterback is hurt in this way, because some of them will, A, you're announcing limitations, and B, you're giving opposing defenses an opportunity to exploit that if possible. Hey, if a guy's got a hurt rib, let's try to get some shots on that rib if we can.
What do you think is going to happen to the bottom of a pile? When you tell the other team, man, my quarterback's right ankle is bothering him, what do you think is going to happen in the bottom of piles?
You certainly can't rule it out.
You can't.
Exactly.
So you do have to cover for your players who are playing a little banged up for that reason. You can't let the other team know.
There's multiple reasons. There's multiple reasons why you would want to do it or why you wouldn't, and a lot of them shy away from it. And so my point is that a lot of that conversation where Texas was really struggling, that, you know, Arch, if he was banged up, which I do think that he started to get better. He started to improve. The offensive line started to play just a little bit better, and they were playing a much better brand of football by the end of the year. Alabama, on the other hand, when Ty got hurt, which we now know is confirmed, we didn't know it for sure, but all of us were speculating accurately that it was, you know, that we were hearing that he was banged up. And so I think their issues, partly, it went well beyond any sort of Ty Simpson injury, but how he was being asked to be Superman early and carry things, how can you expect him to continue to do that when he is not even remotely healthy? You know, that was where things really started to fall apart, in my opinion, is that he compensated for a lot. Now, you know, once again, not trying to say, oh, you know, I'm saying that having the whole reason that I said all of that, which kind of got off subject there, Arch had a lot of unnecessary praise that was not earned yet, but everybody could see where it could go, right? Everybody with Dante Moore, you know, when he played quite a bit at UCLA as a freshman, it didn't look all that great. He comes into Oregon. Does he start? No. He sits for a year. But and then going into last year, there was a lot of praise as far as what Oregon was going to continue to be, despite the fact they lost Dylan Gabriel. And it, you know, started off pretty good for Dante Moore, but he continuously got better, in my opinion, over the course of the season. And so you saw where it could go. Nothing he had shown up to that point, you know, preseason last year indicated that he should be considered in that elite tier, but you knew he could get there. And so that's where I'm at with Keelan. And in a lot of ways, that's where I'm at with Austin Mack as well. I could very easily see how we could get to that point where they are viewed in an elite category. But like, as you mentioned, that has not been proven on the field yet, at least not to me. Now, to Ryan Grubb, he might have seen enough in practice where he's like, I'm pretty darn certain these guys are going to step on the field and be elite. Don't think that's necessarily – I think he was trying to build his quarterback's confidence. And despite the fact that you're losing a premium NFL talent like Ty Simpson, he wanted those guys to know he believes in both of them. Maybe he shouldn't have worded it that way, but I more so understood it. I think it's encouraging that you do have the offensive coordinator willing to take that step forward, because if he didn't have immense confidence in these guys, he wouldn't have said that, or at least you would have hoped that he wouldn't have. And so that makes me encouraged about this group.
I think, you know, I compared Keelan when Alabama signed him. Now, I'm not making player comps like his game is like them, but I think Keelan's talent level is similar to Tua's and Bryce's out of high school. I mean, I felt that he was a Tua level prospect and a Bryce Young level prospect. And one commonality that Tua and Bryce have, well, they have several, but one commonality they had is both were ready in year two. They might have been partially ready in year one, and we know Tua made a big play in year one, so, more than one actually. But the point is, they became starters in year two, and they were clearly ready in year two. Now it's about to be Keelan's year two, and I suspect that he's going to be ready, because I've never changed believing that Keelan has that level of talent and that type of ceiling. But I'll be completely honest here, and I don't think I've said this yet anywhere, but I'll be honest. I'm sort of hoping Austin beats him out. And this is why. Not only is it Austin's best opportunity to be a successful quarterback, because it's kind of now or never for a year four guy. If Austin beats Keelan out, and that's what we're hearing is that Austin's ahead, I'm going to be sky high on Austin, because, again, it's not going to change how I feel about how good Keelan is. So if Austin's beating him out, you got a heck of a quarterback. I mean, I won't feel, at least for now, I won't feel like it's because Keelan is disappointing. It's going to be because Austin is great. He has the ceiling to be great. He, again, looks like he's made in a lab, size-wise, arm talent, The intangibles through the roof. I mention this all the time. I think dad's a commercial airline pilot. I don't know that you can get better intangibles for a quarterback than dad's a pilot. That's the second best thing to dad being a former NFL quarterback. But so I'm really excited about Austin if he beats out Keelan, because I remain at this point very optimistic that Keelan can have a Bryce or Tua level type career.
Yeah, and I feel like that with Austin Mack, you got to think from a size standpoint, from an arm standpoint, from a mobility standpoint. He is what you want at the position. And the fact that I saw the kind of improvement that I saw going from the decision making limited what we saw in the spring and what we were being told from the spring to what we saw and we're being told about him come when he's getting on the field against Indiana in meaningful action, or late in some of these games against some of these, Louisiana Monroe and Eastern Illinois and things like that. I saw tremendous improvement. And I feel like the decision making and just not putting the football in harm's way really is where he needed to make the most growth. And the fact that he's making that growth makes me very encouraged. Now, here's the other side of this. Yes, he will have pressure on him coming from Keelan Russell, but he is now more so in the driver's seat than he ever was in any of these previous quarterback battles.
Totally
that
true.
Takes pressure off of you. Like, he was trying to go out there and make plays to position himself to leap an older guy like Jalen Milroe to some extent a couple of years ago, but more so Ty Simpson in 2025. Ty got to go out there and say, I'm already the leader. Let me not do anything to screw this up. And so like there's this, he didn't feel pressured to force things. I think more so I'm excited to see what Austin Mack is or does now that he's more so in that position. Not saying there won't be pressure, and Keelan's definitely the type of guy where if he takes the same approach, let me go make a bunch of plays and let me leapfrog Austin Mack. He's talented and capable enough to do that. So you got to be careful, but I just think it's a different mentality, and I will be curious, not saying it's going to change anything necessarily. I'll just be curious to see what that ends up looking like relative to what it's been in the first couple of what you would call quarterback battles.
Yeah, don't underestimate how important this is, because it was really to Ty's benefit. And I pointed this out last year before spring practice started. I said this, the exact thing. I'm going to say it now for Austin Mack. There's an advantage to being the day one, practice one, rep one starter. And there's an advantage. I mean, and by that, I mean, on March 9th, Alabama's going to practice 33 days from today. It's 5 weeks from last Monday. So they're going to practice, I think it's March 9th. Spring practice, day one, rep one. When Alabama's starting 11 makes its very initial appearance on day one, Austin Mack will be the quarterback, because that's how it works. He ended last year, obviously playing, ahead of Keelan. So Austin's going to be that guy, rep one. Now, Keelan may pass him up that day for all I know. Keelan may just be better, and then day two, then Keelan's the guy. I don't know. I'm just saying this. Keelan's going to have to beat him out. I mean, that might happen fast. It might happen slow. It might happen never. But Keelan will have to beat him out. Austin's the older guy, and he will be the day one, rep one starter. And I said last year, Ty's going to be that guy. And I don't know that anyone's going to catch him or beat him out, and that's what happened. I'm not saying that about Austin Mack, because my prediction is that I do think Keelan ultimately becomes a starting quarterback. But he's going to have to catch Austin and beat him out to do it, and I don't think Austin's going to make it easy.
And that's what makes me encouraged about the whole thing, is that I completely agree, and I think that's going to elevate both players. And I think that if I end up being correct and you end up being correct and Keelan ultimately ends up winning that job, which once again is far from a sure thing, that's just going to make me have that much more belief in Keelan, because I don't think that if it would have been Ty Simpson, if Ty Simpson would have come back, then him leapfrogging Ty Simpson would have been a massive deal, massive. So it can't be viewed as that, but it's something to be said is unless Austin Mack gets out there and just we're hearing reports about him just falling apart and he's just not performing well. And then it starts to become okay, you better hope Keelan's ready. I don't think that's going to be what happens, though. I've been encouraged by what I've seen from him. So if Keelan ends up winning it, it's going to be because Keelan earned it. And Keelan is that good to be, he's going to earn Alabama's starting quarterback job. Jimmy, as always, brother, I appreciate you hopping on here with me. I appreciate the conversation. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. If you haven't already, like this video. That helps us with our algorithm. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. That is a big way to support us. If you listen to podcasts, or even if you don't, if you have an iPhone or have a podcast streaming, device, please go to Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, and search the Cover Crimson Podcast Network. Hit that downloads button. That will help us tremendously. And then, as always, help our sponsors. These are the ones that are taking care of us. We appreciate them just in the same way that we appreciate you guys. Roback is our #1 sponsor. Get on over to roback.com. Use the promo code Crimson20 to get 20% off your order, and we will talk to you guys soon.